Thank you for telling me.
Archbishop Brown to do a blessing for us, please, and bless this whole occasion. In the name of Jesus.
My Lord.
We love this place, oh Lord. Oh Lord, this morning, Father, Lord, look at in time on our Jesus. This spot we stand this morning, Jesus. We come to consecrate it, Master. Take my life and let it be consecrated, Lord, today. Lord, this morning, and they're going to take the lead. And we thank God for togetherness this morning. And love and unity and peace this morning. Upon this house we stand. We consecrate this spot now this morning in the name of God the Father. We consecrate it again in the name of the Son. And we consecrate it in the Holy Spirit of God. Bless the spot.
My Lord.
Bless be.
Bless the Lord.
Bishops, elders, co-workers in the vineyard. Special good day to Teacher Hazel. I'm about to read a psalm, which is the psalm that we are walking with through the centenary year. It's taken from Psalm 124, my Lord, Psalm is taken. The beginning of portion of God, Holy Word. Praise the Lord. If it had not been the Lord who was on our side, now may Israel say. If it had not been the Lord who was on our side when men rose up against us, then they had swallowed us up quick. When their wrath was kindled against us, then the waters had overwhelmed us. The stream had gone over our soul. Then the proud waters had gone over our soul. Blessed be the Lord who had not given us as a prey to their teeth. Our soul is escaped as a bird out of the snare of the fowlers. The snare is broken, and we are escaped. Our help is in the name of the Lord who made heaven and earth. Glory be to the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Friends and brethren, we are saying today, if it had not been the Lord who was on our side, probably we would not have made it today. Because we all well know the history that they tried to wipe us out by the passing of that prohibition ordinance. Right? And because of our faith and our steadfastness in our God, the God who we serve, the one true and living God, that we are here today. Let us give God praise and thanks that we are gathered together in one happy unity, and that we will continue in togetherness and in brotherly love in Jesus' mighty name. This portion is a small portion. We are about to go inside now to ask God thanksgiving upon this opportunity. Thank you, Lord, for this
The food was because of Jesus' blood. Let our soul be given, bread of life and love from heaven. Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, the love of God and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit, rest and abide with us now and forevermore.
Welcome to History Fest 2017. It is an honor to have the members of the Shelter Baptist community with us and all of our joining friends who are interested in this aspect of Trinidad and Tobago's culture and history. My name is Dr. Allison Ramsey. I will be the chair for today's proceedings. I am a member of the Department of History and a member of the History Fest Committee, the organizing committee for today's event. Today we will have the forum on the Shelter Prohibition Ordinance of 1917, and today we have a discussion by two panelists, and we have a short film for viewing along with questions and answers. At this time, I would like to invite the department head, Dr. Sharian Singh, to offer some opening remarks. Dr. Singh?
His Grace Archbishop Patrick Brown, Reverend Dr. Hazel Ann Gibbs, King Shepherd Bishop Ray M.S. Braffett, Bishop Victor Phillips, Bishop Earl Hippolyte, Bishop Dominic Andrew, Bishop Dr. Raymond Walcott, Bishop Philip Placide, Reverend Mother Superintendent Angela Patrick, Reverend Mother Superintendent Mason Brown, Bishop Nichols, Reverend Mother Adams, and other elders of the Spiritual Shouter Baptist Faith. Featured speaker, Dr. Claudius Fergus, Professor Bridget Brereton, staff members of the Department of History and staff members of the University of the West Indies, members of the History Fest Committee, invited guests, students, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Good morning. Welcome to the third day of activities of our third annual History Fest. Initiated in 2015, History Fest has become a major facet of the Department of History's ongoing research, outreach and research program, aimed at highlighting and promoting the history of Trinidad and Tobago and the Caribbean. This year's History Fest commemorates the centenary anniversary of three major events in Trinidad and Tobago's history: the halting of the shipment of Indians under the system of World War I, and the passing of the Shouters Prohibition Ordinance. Thus, 1917 was a year that marked the trials and tribulations of three key groups in Trinidad society, each embarking on a long and arduous journey to liberation of varying forms, from economic exploitation, from religious discrimination, and from religious inequality. It would be remiss of us as the keepers and disseminators of history if we had not highlighted these events as the theme of the 2017 History Fest. And that theme is 1917, Liberating Indian Indentured Laborers, War Veterans, and Baptists. Today, the third day of the activities of the 2017 History Fest is dedicated to the Shouters Prohibition Ordinance of 1917 and the people who were deeply impacted by it. I know that those of us who were outside the Alma Jordan Library would definitely agree with me when I say that the activities and rituals that were performed were a most felicitous and auspicious start to today's activities. We can definitely say that the History Fest and the campus of the University of the West Indies were both deeply blessed by the very essence of the Spiritual Shouter Baptist faith. I would like to express my deepest appreciation and thanks to Reverend Dr. DePisa and members of the Spiritual Shouter Baptist faith for coming here today and for ritually commemorating the event that birthed years of struggle, which propelled the growth and development of the Spiritual Shouter Baptist faith in Trinidad and Tobago. We are especially pleased that Reverend Dr. DePisa will be part of the academic forum this morning. We are also extremely fortunate to have as our second speaker the proverbial founding father of History Fest, the very eminent historian, Dr. Claudius Fergus. Thank you, Dr. Fergus, for continuing to nurture your brainchild. I know that this morning's session is going to be an intellectually stimulating and richly rewarding one. Once again, welcome to History Fest 2017. Let us commemorate 1917 and the people who struggled for their rights and freedoms during that year and beyond. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Singh. We would have really enjoyed your sharing with us some of your blessings and rituals in terms of your sanctification, and the History Department wishes to offer our condolences on the passing of your deceased member, Her Grace Archbishop Monica Wandu. So thank you for still coming despite your time of mourning. At this time, we will have our panel discussion. The first speaker in today's panel is Reverend Dr. Hazel Ann Gibbs DePisa. She is the chairman of the United Voice of the Spiritual Shouter Baptist Faith, the holder of a PhD in education, lecturer at the University of Trinidad and Tobago, author of 3 outstanding publications, Says Creole, Correcting Misconceptions, the Spiritual Baptist Faith, and My Faith, Spiritual Baptist Christian. Today she will speak to us on the growth of the faith in TNT. The second speaker on the panel is Dr. Claudius Fergus, former head of Department of History of the UWI, specialist in the study of African and African diasporic studies, author of Negotiating Time, Space and Spirit, The Sietes Partidas, a framework for philanthropy and coercion, Dread of Insurrection, Abolitionism, Security and Labor in Britain's West Indian Colonies, 1760 to 1823, and the monograph, Revolutionary Emancipation and Abolitionism. Today, he is presenting the paper, The Shelters Prohibition Ordinance of 1917, Constitutional Issues in Enactment and Repeal. The third contributor in absentia, but present through his film, is Mr. Raymond Oyorade. He is a Trinidadian-Nigerian film director. He won Best International Short Documentary at the Columbia George Film Festival in 2011 for The Shelters and Control Freak Empire, which will be presented today. He holds a Bachelor of Technology in Industrial Design Graphics and a BA in Film from UWI St. Augustine. At this time, please welcome to the podium Dr. DePisa.
We are looking today at the growth and development of the Spiritual Shelter Baptist Faith, and we thank the UWI History Fest for honoring us by recognizing that this year is 100 years since the 1917 prohibition against the faith. So we want to look at the origins and settings. And we would note that we were plagued by the Prohibition Ordinance of 1917, and then we were granted liberation in 1951 by the repeal, and we were vindicated by the grant of a national public holiday in 1996. But we are still misunderstood and misrepresented, and misconceptions still abound in 2017. Now, I'm not going to be dealing with the Prohibition Ordinance and the repeal because Dr. Fergus is the expert in that area. But I just needed to highlight them because that is part of the hallmark of our history. So we had the Ordinance of 1917, and then it took a while before we got the repeal in 1951. And then it took a number of years again before we got the holiday. And you would notice that the holiday was granted to us by Prime Minister, the Honorable Basil Pandey in 1996, so that it commenced on March 30th, 1996, and each year we have this public holiday, and as is written in the Hansard, to be known as Spiritual Baptist Liberation Shouters Day, in recognition of the repeal of the 1917 Shouters Prohibition Ordinance on March 30th, 1951. I raised the question of misrepresentation because 2 years ago I was doing a presentation for the distinguished lectures at UTT, and I did some research and realized that in the revised laws of Trinidad and Tobago, Act number 27 of 1917 is missing, and Act number 20 of 1951 is also missing. And I checked, it would have been around December of last year, and the list of omitted acts not normally published in revised editions, there was Act number 9 of 1917, so the year is there. There was Act number 35 of 1918, but Act number 27 of 1917 is still missing. And Act number 20 of 1951 is still missing. So perhaps in his deliberation, Dr. Fergus will tell us all about all about that. But so we are misrepresented. And then, of course, there are misconceptions about the faith. And once we're talking about the growth and the development of the faith, we need to address these misconceptions. So that very often people tell us that the spiritual Baptist faith was started in 1843 by the English missionary George Cowan. And then there are those including the Attorney General at the time, who claimed that shouters came from St. Vincent after they made themselves an unmitigated nuisance in 1912 and the law was passed against them. And then we also have the report that we were having indecent acts when we are shaking. And all of those, of course, are misconceptions about our faith. Some more misconceptions, that we are a cult of devil worshippers, and that was in a textbook that was being used for teaching social studies in the secondary schools of Trinidad and Tobago. And when it was brought to my attention, I wrote to the then Minister of Education, and there was a big thing in the newspapers about it. And eventually, they pulled the book from the program in the secondary schools. I haven't paid attention if they have brought it back or if the changes were made, because they said they were asking the author to make some changes, but I haven't really followed up on that. And then there are those who say we are an offshoot from Orisha. And there are those who say that the spiritual Baptists and the Shango are one and the same and cannot be separated. And there are those who say that African religion is for poor, uneducated Negroes. So we have to correct these misconceptions. So on the first issue of the Time, 1843, we see that 1803 we had the arrival of the first African American soldiers. 1815 to 1816 we had those who we call the Company Baptists, right? And Cowan came in 1834, so he couldn't have brought the Baptist faith to us. All right. 1912 was the Shakers' prohibition in St. Vincent. 1917 was our Shouters' prohibition here in Trinidad. And we see that 1912 is quite a long way after 1803 and 1815 and even 1834. So then the faith could not have been brought here from St. Vincent. While there, we recognize that a number of members of the faith would have come over after the passing of that prohibition, but they certainly met our faith going here in Trinidad and Tobago. And as to the Inspector General's indecent behavior, he was unable to produce any evidence to support the charge that he laid against us. And I have to say, as I usually do, I've been in the faith for quite a while, and I have never seen or experienced any indecent behavior when we are shaking. On the other issue, we need to understand that Orisha, or Shango as we call it, is the local expression of African traditional religion. And Spiritual and Shouter Baptist is the local expression of Christianity. Right? All the books about the faith will tell you that, will confirm that, and enough of us are here to acknowledge that. And the term Shango Baptist is a misnomer because we're talking about two distinct belief systems. So that Shango or Orisha do not believe in Jesus Christ. They do not believe that he is the savior of the world and that his sacrifice was the final sacrifice. But Baptists are from the Christian tradition, and that's our belief. So therefore, there are two distinct belief systems. And while some persons may decide to follow both streams, as many people straddle several things here in Trinidad and Tobago, we know that we mix things up a lot, right? But the fact is that you cannot have a faith called Shango Baptist because one doctrine obviates the other. Of course, the faith embraces people of every race and ethnicity. So to say that the faith is just for poor black African people, uneducated, is not correct at all. And what it does is to deny the fact of religion, because religion is that phase of man's cultural system whereby he explains and adjusts himself to the unknown, the mysterious, and the mighty. So it doesn't matter what is the name of your religion. That's where you're heading, into the mysterious, the unknown, and the mighty. That's what religion is all about. So that when educated persons who are writing about the faith refer to it as a haven for poor, uneducated Negroes, one realizes that they are blotting out from their minds the whole role of religion in society. And for the Africans, religion is a part of the cultural heritage. It is closely bound up with the traditional way of African life. So that wherever we are as the descendants of Africa, that rhythm and that spirituality will always be with us. It's written into our DNA. And when we look at the whole question of African Christianity, what we see is that the Africans have fashioned Christianity to our culture. And we recognize that everybody else fashioned Christianity to suit them. So Roman Catholicism is a particular fashioning of Christianity. Anglicanism is another fashioning of Christianity. And we have several others that have come about since those two in the earlier days. So ours is just that we have fashioned Christianity to our culture. So the rhythm of the drums, the hand clapping, the movement of the body to match the movement of the spirit and the rhythm. And the all-embracing approach to religion as a way of life. And part of the history of the Baptist faith is that community life in the church, in the faith. So that if we were to recall from Earl Lovelace's Wine of Astonishment, when he chronicles some of the aspects of the faith, so that at the end of the service, everybody would be checking to find out who's sick, who need help, where to go, who's still planting corn and needs some help in that area, because we moved as a family, as a community. And we have several examples of African Christianity all over the world. Aladura in Africa, Southern Baptists in USA, Revivalists in Jamaica, Shakers in St. Vincent, Spiritual Shouter Baptists in Trinidad and Tobago. And I also said that we are misunderstood. So who are we? And some people say we are a multi-religious mixture. So there are those who say Baptist is a little bit of everything under the sun. And then there are those who refer to us as the Obia people. So if you want Obia, you go by the Baptist. And there are those who refer to us as a cult. They say we're not a religion, we're a cult. And of course, there are those who refer to us as Shango Baptists, which we looked at a while ago. And then there are the other two names, the Shouter Baptist and the Spiritual Baptist. And Shouter is a name that was given to us when they wanted to pass the Prohibition Ordinance. They had to get a name for us. They didn't know what to call us. And since we made a lot of noise, they decided that they'll call us Shouters. Right? And in the process of our own development, we recognize our affinity to the Spirit of God, and therefore we refer to ourselves as spiritual Baptists. So we now have the combination spiritual shouter Baptists, because we're not denying the shouting. We're going to shout, as the song says, we shout last night, we shout tomorrow night, and we'll shout forevermore. We're not going to stop shouting. So spiritual Baptists, shouter Baptists, spiritual shouter Baptists. And as I said, we're misunderstood. The historical records gave us a stigma. So because we were banned, people still have the opinion that we belong hidden in the bush somewhere, out of civilization, because as the records show in Hansard, when they were discussing the Prohibition Ordinance, that they complained about the noise and said that civilized people should not have to put up with this kind of behavior, all this noise at all hours of the night. You know, so the historical records gave us a stigma, which unfortunately is not yet removed. And then, of course, there is the researcher's bias and prejudice that lead to discredited facts. So that some of the references that I made earlier to descriptions of the faith, and there's one in particular that comes from a piece of work that is lying right here in UWI Library, because it was a dissertation that someone did, where the gentleman described that what happens when the spiritual Baptists get shaking is something that is evil and demonic. But when the Catholic priests do the same thing when they are mourning, it's something holy and reverent. They're not the same at all. The fact that we come from an oral tradition, and a lot of researchers, when they would have interviewed our members, the members would have had an inability to articulate their beliefs and practices in the way that the researchers would understand. So that sometimes when you read the research that was done, as a Baptist, you're amazed at some of the things they say about the faith, because you wonder, well, where did that come from? But then when you recognize that they are speaking a different language from the members of the faith, you realize that very often they don't even understand what we're talking about. And of course, there are our historical circumstances. So all of these lead to the misunderstanding that continues about the faith. So I want to just take us into a little area, not for long, what Frantz Fanon calls the epidermalization of inferiority. And he says that all colonized people, in other words, people in whom an inferiority complex has taken root, whose local cultural originality has been committed to the grave, position themselves in relation to the civilizing language. That is the metropolitan culture. And we see that still perpetuated in our education system today, because instead of teaching our children how to think, we're still teaching them what to think. And that is what they did in the early years. And our very language has been denigrated, so that we are told that we speak broken English and we can't speak properly. And even though linguists have finally agreed that the Creole is a language in its own right, because all of the rules and all of the structures are there in the Creole that you would find in any other language, we still have that attitude to our language. And so let's just look at a few of the things that we Baptists say that people don't usually understand. So we say, get on your tramp, and people think about horses tramping, you know, and they don't understand that all we're talking about, get on your tramp, get to the rhythm, keep moving. And when we say, she catch the spirit, and the people have commented, and I've read it as well in people's writing, that if we catch the spirit, it had to be something coming from somewhere that we're catching, right? And they don't understand, you know, the movement of the spirit in the body of the believer. And when we say, they tell me, and we are referring to the Holy Spirit, and some people go so far as to say, well, who is they? You know, because they're supposed to be plural and it's more than one, so how much spirit are they talking about? But I want to bring to your attention the fact that we are Creole speakers, and therefore, in the Creole language, we identify pluralization differently from the English language, and we have certain concepts. So we say a bag of mango, and that is not one mango. Because if somebody gives you a bag of mango, and it only have one mango in it, you want to know what's going on with them. Right? So that although we say a bag of mango, and we don't say mangoes, we understand more than one. Right? And in the same way, when we talk about persons, if somebody sends you out to do something, your mother may have sent you to the shop and somebody meets you on the road. So where are you going? They send me in the shop. Who's they? You're talking about your mother. But the language that we use, we say they, and it doesn't mean more than one, because it's referring to whoever the person is that told us whatever to do. So that very often people get confused because of the language that we use. And we go a little further, and we look at the fact that what we did and what we do is called obia. So you go to the obia people. But now people pay money for aromatherapy. And aromatherapy is the use of the same colored candles that we use. It's the use of the same oils that we use. It's the use of the same fragrances from the various flowers that we use. But because this Baptist is obia, but when you pay for it, it's aromatherapy. And they have several studies based on aromatherapy and the effect of these oils and how they calm and they soothe people. So that in England there was an experiment that they did with a number of women and realized that many of them, when going for childbirth, when they did the aromatherapy, it made the childbirth so much easier, and sometimes they didn't even have to take the cesarean section. But when our old middy, as we used to call the midwives who were mothers in the faith, used the same aromatherapy and anointed the tummy and had easy childbirth, that was called obia. And of course, we sing sankies, trumpets, and choruses. And now people sing gospel songs. And as to our historical circumstances, we realize that because of the way we were treated and because of the situation at the time, we had to be in remote locations. We had to have small congregations, because if the police come in and it's just a few of us, we could run. But if it's a whole place full, then, you know, we make it too easy for them. We had to camouflage. We had to deal in secrecy. And because we were small groups in particular places, we also had a certain sense of autonomy, because I was master of all I survey. So that what people call disunity was really survival. We had to function in the way that we did in order to survive. And so we have survived. And when people question how many bishops and archbishops we have, we just have to ask about other religious groups who did not have to run from the police, who did not have to settle in small communities in order to protect themselves. Why is it that they have a number of versions and types and groupings of their organizations? And sometimes I think that perhaps there's something in the food that everybody is eating. So even though they didn't go through the same things we went through, they end up doing the same things that we do. So in terms of our growth and development, we have evidence of having moved from the little tapia hut and the church by the river way up in the bush into elaborate buildings. So our growth and development has produced for us dioceses and umbrella organizations, a new size and structure of churches, the Herman Parish Spiritual Baptist Southland School of Theology, foundation where we give awards and scholarships to spiritual Baptist children, the Mounting Wave, which is a business enterprise, the Reforestation Project, we have our hymnal, we have our Baptist Ministers Manual, and we have a number of published works on the faith by members of the faith. And we see here that we have moved up, so there's the reforestation program there. We see our little ones taking part in emancipation celebrations in Port of Spain. We see that we read from books, we publish books, and we take them to the library so that they are in Nalis. Our little ones are playing the pan. And at the top there we have Bishop Dr. Paris, who started the School of Theology. And we are showing, therefore, our growth and development over the years. And of course, we have a number of ECC schools. We have primary schools I have there because the St. Barbara's School at Maloney is not the first primary school for the Baptist faith. It's the first one that the government funded. But we had Baptist primary schools in the past. And we have homes for the aged and hospital ministry, prison ministry, radio and television programs, recorded gospel artists, university graduates. We have them all. So we have enough evidence of our growth and development. And here we highlight some of the written encyclopedias that we have and some of the living encyclopedias, because just recently we honored some centenarians, and all those women you see sitting in front there are over 100 years old. And we had them all in a ceremony to honor them in this, our centenary year. And in spite of our growth and development, we keep our identity with our Baptist expression. So we still have baptism. We're not giving that up either, just as we're not giving up the tramping and the shouting and the clapping and the singing. And of course, the Mona Room. We're not giving up those things. No, we're not giving them up, right? So we're growing and developing, but we are true to our identity. Nelson Mandela says our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. And we know that sometimes we are really afraid of the power that we have. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. And because of the training that we've been given, because of the kind of education we've had, we ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant or gorgeous or talented or fabulous or loved? And the question is, who are you not to be? After all, you are a child of God. And so for the forward movement, we must preserve our identity. We must confront history, which is his story, not our story. And we must configure and proclaim our story. And in this year of the centenary, we use as one of our emblems the Sankofa bird, who is going forward, but taking a look back at where we have come from. And so we say 1917, 2017, and we're going 1 century more. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Dr. De Pisa. It was very interesting to hear some of the myths, misconceptions, and how the Baptist community has been misunderstood. She has debunked some of these myths as well, and she has explained origins, how the spiritual shelters got their name, and that your approach to religion is a way of life and the importance of community. And as a result of these misconceptions, Dr. DePisa also highlighted some of the challenges that the Baptist community has had to face as a result of the stigma in society. But nonetheless, the spiritual shelters are moving on, they're surviving, they're adapting, and they have a path that they're on for their growth and development, and they are proclaiming our story. I think that was a very powerful way she ended that presentation. And I'd like to learn some expressions, so I'm going to use get on your tramp. I like that one. Get on your tramp. Yes. So now we're going to have Dr. Fergus coming to the podium to offer his presentation on the Shelter Baptist.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
All protocols observed. But I'm particularly pleased to be here this morning to contribute in my own way to the recognition of the struggles of the spiritual Baptist, a very difficult time in our history. I must confess I do have a political intent in my presentation because I want to make really a case for reparations on behalf of the Baptist community. Now, globally, the year 1917 was a major watershed in modern history. The head of the department pointed out three significant areas. I just want to broaden that a little bit. It marked the Russian Revolution and Russia's exit from the First World War. At the same time, it marked the entry of the United States into that war. And the first birth pangs of what became the Balfour Declaration, which laid the foundation for the establishment of the State of Israel. It was a year of celebration for Indians in the diaspora because in that year, the Indian government, as you know, prohibited the emigration of the people to become, in a sense, hewers of wood for British and French capitalists in very poor conditions. On the contrary, 1917 was a year of infamy for peoples of African descent in the Caribbean, not only in Trinidad, because in that year, the government of Trinidad and Tobago, the legislature really, passed its second prohibition ordinance. Of course, St. Vincent was the first, to deny the spiritual or shelter Baptists the right to freedom of conscience. My presentation will focus on the constitutionality of the Shelters Prohibition Ordinance of 1917, as well as the precedent, that is the 1912 Shakerism Prohibition Ordinance in St. Vincent, because these two pieces of legislation are integrally connected, and we need to understand the Trinidad one more so by studying what happened in St. Vincent. Now, these two ordinances really are, in a sense, they address the same phenomenon, which was clearly the threat that they represented to colonial state establishments, which were protective of white supremacy in all its forms. The Trinidad and Tobago Ordinance was an almost exact replica of the St. Vincent legislation, mainly because it was believed at the time that the St. Vincent Ordinance had succeeded in virtually wiping out the Shakers or the Spiritual Baptists there. Now, the British government knew that the legislation, the ordinance, the Sheltered Ordinance, was defective. They knew that. Yet, they went ahead and sanctioned it, even though they knew that it was based on shaky constitutional ground. And they did that largely because the law had already been implemented and had taken its effect, and therefore to reverse that would have been a constitutional embarrassment of a major kind. And that explains, as Bishop De Pisa, why the legislation is missing from the books. Now, the case I make for the unconstitutionality of the ordinances are based on those bulleted points there, and they include the attempt in both colonies to deny that Shakerism or Shouterism could be classified as a religion. The actual acknowledgement in the colonial office that Shakerism was a form of religious expression peculiar to African people. Also that the Toleration Acts, the English Toleration Acts, actually prohibited discrimination of a wide range of Protestant sects, including the Shouter Baptists. After the Prohibition Ordinance, the Shouters, as you heard, reconfigured their own identity and called themselves Spiritual Baptists or Baptists, but the prohibition still followed them. The Baptist religion, or whatever prefix that you put, fell definitely within the protection of the Toleration Acts. And the demonization of the Shakers or Shouters as promoters of indecency and crazy excitement and so on was nothing but legal engineering to circumvent the Toleration Acts in general, and specifically the British government's repeal of a similar prohibition against the African-dominated Methodist Church in Trinidad in 1817. Now, Shakerism or Shouterism was one of the many cultural, creative reconstructions by Africans who had been trafficked into colonial slavery in the Americas, by agencies who were determined to deny them the freedom of religious conscience and to mold them into subservient versions of European Christianity. Now, it is seldom known that African Christianity preceded the European version of Christianity. There are many sites in Africa where Christianity existed during the period of the Atlantic slave trade. In fact, many Africans who were Christians were brought into the Caribbean. So that the beginning of Shouterism might in fact precede the arrival of the Americans into Trinidad. You have, for example, in Egypt, one of the oldest sites of Christianity, and Ethiopia. But you also had Christianity in the Kingdom of Congo from the 16th century, and in the Kingdom of Benin as well. So those are some things that you need to take on board when you are studying this problem. And to me, the problem is the reparations for this nefarious legislation. This just speaks to the church in Trinidad, which was founded by colored or African people itself. And you would see here where a similar charge was made against them, this making noise and public nuisance, which found its way in the legislation almost exactly verbatim in the 20th century. So these are